Today I have one of the most mysterious cold case stories to tell you in Pennsylvania history. This is the case of the boy in the box. And I'm telling this story to you all today because after 65 years, there has finally been a break in the case. And this break came thanks to the exact same databases that ended up catching the Golden State Killer. So I thought right now would be a great time to bring this case to all of your attention. February 5th of 1957, the body of a little boy would be discovered inside a box on the side of Susquehanna Road in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was found naked, extensively beaten and bruised. He was also severely malnourished and covered in scars, some which were said to have been surgical on places like his ankles, groin, and chin. Yet, despite all of this, he seemed to be clean and freshly groomed. He had a recent haircut and trimmed fingernails, although the haircut was thought to have been rushed and messy because there was still pieces of his hair on his body. And this little boy looked to be around the age of 4 to 6 years old. This little boy's body had been wrapped in a plaid blanket and left inside of a cardboard box in the woods next to a then rural road. It turns out that the body of this little boy was first discovered by a young man who was checking his muskrat traps. Fearing that the police would confiscate his traps, he didn't report what he had found, which is just absolutely terrible. A few days later, after the body of this little child lay in the cold woods, a LaSalle college student would spot a rabbit running into the bush. Knowing there were traps in the area, this young man ended up stopping his car, getting out, and going into the woods after the rabbit. But what he would find was not a rabbit, but the body of a small child. This college student was once again also reluctant to call the police. I don't know why there were so many people reluctant to call the police back then, but he finally decided to after a little girl named Mary Jane Barker went missing. Mary was a 3-year-old little girl who had wandered off and gotten stuck inside of a closet in a vacant home and ended up starving to death. But in the boy in the box's case, he was determined to have died from homicide by blunt force trauma. Police would end up taking the little boy's fingerprints. He'd be examined and photographed, photos that you can still see on the internet to this day. They are very graphic, and they are the photos of a dead child. And police were very optimistic that they would identify this little boy very quickly. However, no one came forward to claim this little boy. The crime scene was combed over and over again by 270 police academy recruits. They ended up discovering a man's blue corduroy cap, a child's scarf, and a man's white handkerchief with the letter G in the corner. The box the little boy was placed in once contained a bassinet like the one sold by JCPenney at the time. But all of these clues led nowhere. At this point, police were stumped, and they went as far as dressing up the body of this dead little boy and propping him up in a sitting position and taking photos of him. But they did this in hopes that someone would recognize him, and they thought since these photos of him dead weren't working, that maybe a photo of him sitting up looking alive might jog someone's memory. And there are so many photos of this child's body online, it's honestly pretty shocking. There are not that many cases that have this many autopsy photos that are available online for the general public. This case would end up getting mass media attention in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Inquirer printing over 400,000 flyers with his photos. But despite all of this coverage, all of this attention, the boy in the box was never claimed and never identified. He would eventually be buried in what is called a potter's field, but was eventually removed for a DNA sample. He would then be reburied in Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. A large plot, a coffin, headstone, and funeral service would be donated by the detectives who worked his case to lay this little boy to rest and show him that even though his family didn't want him, that people did still love him. Residents over the years would continue to keep his grave decorated with flowers and toys. The little boy in the box would end up being known as America's unknown child. And to go along with all of this would come many theories. And today I'm going to tell you about the 3 most popular theories of who this little boy could have been. The first theory was that this little boy had come from a foster home that was around 1.5 miles away from where the body of this little boy was discovered. In 1960, an employer of the examiner's office named Remington Bristow was brought to an estate sale at this foster home by a psychic. At the foster home, he claims to have found a bassinet that was very similar to the one that box the little boy was found in would have contained. He also claimed that there were blankets hanging on the clotheslines there that were very similar to the blanket that the little boy was wrapped in. Remington's theory was that this little boy was the child of the stepdaughter of the man who owned the foster home, and he had gotten rid of his grandson so that his daughter wouldn't be, outed as an unwed mother. Police investigated, however, and nothing seemed to have been found. All of the foster children seemed to be accounted for. The second big theory was a woman known as M or Martha. February of 2002, a woman named M claimed that her abusive mother had purchased the unknown boy, and his name was Jonathan. This theory really gives me chills. Keep this name in mind when I tell you about the break in the case. Jonathan was thought to have been purchased by his birth parents in the summer of 1954. And little Jonathan was extremely abused by the family that purchased him. He was said to have been essayed for 2.5 years. One evening at dinner, the boy allegedly vomited up his meal of baked beans and was given a very severe beating, with his head being slammed into the floor until he was semi-conscious. The little boy was then given a bath, during which he died. Now, these details matched information that only the police claimed to have known, as the coroner had found that the little boy in the box's stomach had contained baked beans. His fingers were also said to be water wrinkled. Or Martha continued by saying that her mother cut the boy's distinctively long hair, accounting for the unprofessional haircut that the police noted in their investigation. And it was said that she did this to conceal the little boy's identity. Em then alleges that her mother forced her to help her dump this little boy's body in the Fox Chase area. Em then said as they were preparing to remove the little boy's body from the trunk of the car, a passing male motorist ended up pulling alongside and stopping to see if these two women needed help. Em was then ordered by her mother to stand in front of the license plate of the car to shield its view, while her mother convinced the Good Samaritan that they didn't need his help. The man eventually would drive off. Now, this testimony apparently corroborated confidential testimony given by a male witness in 1957. Now, despite all of that seeming very detailed and seemingly matching what police had as evidence, Em was said to have a history of mental illness and police couldn't corroborate her story. Despite all of that, which I'm shocked. There were also neighbors that claimed to have had access to Em's home at this time, and they stated that during this time period, they had never seen a little boy living inside of the home. They also dismissed Em's claims as ridiculous. Now, this theory, out of all of them, I'm going to say, sounds one of the most plausible to me, because this woman has all of these details that she wouldn't be able to know. Only police know. So how would she know all of these details? How did she just make up the story and it just seemingly matched to what police knew? And it seems like the only reason that they ruled out her testimony was because they said she had mental illness. So basically saying she's crazy and she made it all up, which I don't know if that's a good excuse. On top of that, maybe they kept the boy locked up somewhere so the neighbors never seen him. You never know. But then we have a third theory, and that is the theory that the boy in the box was the child of carnies. In 1961, police were made aware of a man named Kenneth Dudley and his wife Irene after one of their 10 children ended up dying. Their 7-year-old daughter Carol Ann had ended up dying from neglect, malnutrition, and exposure, and the couple had wrapped her up in a blanket and left her in a wooded area in Virginia. Sound familiar? It would end up turning out that 7 of their 10 children had died from malnutrition and neglect, and none of them had received proper burials. However, after police questioned the Dudleys and investigated their movements in 1957, law enforcement officials in Philadelphia determined that the couple, while very neglectful parents, and that's an understatement, they were not connected to the boy in the box either. So after all of that, we still had no answers. March 2016, NCMEC, also known as the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, released a forensic facial reconstruction of the boy and added him to their database. In April 2021, the boy's cause of death would be upgraded to blunt force trauma. And it wouldn't be until December 8th of this year, just yesterday, as I'm filming this video, that authorities would finally announce the name of the boy in the box. Thanks to modern DNA analysis, the same tools that were used to catch the Golden State Killer and to figure out who he was, the little boy's DNA would be uploaded to the database. And after doing some investigating, combing through histories and talking to different people, experts would be able to figure out and contact relatives on the boy's mother's side. They ended up obtaining what is called an order of vital records of children born to the woman that they suspected to be the boy's mother, and they finally received the little boy's birth certificate. Through additional testing, experts were able to determine who this little boy's father was as well, although neither of the parents had been announced or named yet. The little boy found in the box was discovered to be 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Little Joseph. I just think it's so sad that this little boy was never claimed. And I guess we'll hopefully figure out why. I'm just so happy that this little boy got his name back after 65 years. And honestly, the technology that we have nowadays shocks me that we don't use it for more cold cases. But we don't have much more information yet other than the boy's name. They haven't released any of the other families' names. They haven't released if they have any information on who they think his killer is, etc. Looking back at those 3 top theories, the second one really piques my interest in thinking that maybe there's a possibility it could be true, because the little boy's name ended up being Joseph. And Martha claimed that the little boy that was bought was named Jonathan. Joseph and Jonathan are pretty close names, and I really wonder if there's a possibility for Martha's story to be true, since she knew so much, and that possibly she just mixed the names up. Maybe she was a little crazy and she forgot his name and she could just remember the J-O and thought it was Jonathan instead of Joseph. Or maybe whoever they bought the little boy off of or whatever told them the wrong name because they had the wrong name. I don't know. Maybe the little boy ended up being kidnapped and sold to the family. Maybe it wasn't actually the family that sold it to this other family. If true. I'm just saying if true because we don't know if any of that's true. I just think it's very strange that this woman knew so much information that only the police would know, especially the baked beans and his stomach content, stuff like that. It's just a little too coincidental to me. We don't exactly know yet what happened to little Joseph. The police still have the investigation into his murder open. They're still looking into things and trying to piece it all together. But figuring out his name is an amazing step. And I hope we can bring more names to more cold cases and unknown Jane Does and John Does. It is said, however, that both of Joseph's parents are deceased, but I still am very curious who his parents were, how they could have lost their child and have never reported it. That could either be very sinister. How could they have not looked for him? This little boy looked so precious. Or maybe they did report him somewhere. Or maybe they were responsible. And that's why they never reported him. Maybe it's this mass conspiracy within the family. We don't know. Little Joseph had a birth certificate. So that's something. Clearly he was born somewhere. He seen a doctor at some point. He did have surgical scars on him. Yet he wasn't just murdered. He was starved and tortured. Who would do that to this precious little boy? And why? Which again really makes me wonder if the parents were just very abusive, or maybe he was abducted and stolen or something, and then whoever had him did this to him. But there are so many unanswered questions that I hope we will have answers to soon. Let me know how you all feel about this case. What big questions do you have right now? Or are there any theories you're leaning towards? Have you heard about this case before? I got very fascinated when I learned that this case happened in Pennsylvania. It's where my husband's from. But yeah, let me know how you feel. I am just so happy that this little boy finally has his name and that hopefully we can get more answers for him. I will keep you updated if they release any more information on this case because I am invested now and I want to see justice for this little boy. With that, if you are not subscribed, I really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It allows me to continue to create content like this, tell these stories, and spread the word on these cases. I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your doors and windows, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.